This is the Cultural Index, where we look into various science fiction species to get a sense of their lore and culture from both canon and speculation. This time the viewer voted option was the Star Trek species that looks for things they need to make them go. The Pakleds, or as the Borg designation is, the species 95012. Wait, the Borg assimilated a Pakled vessel? Right off the bat, let's start with the reputation for this species. They are generally considered to be underdeveloped in the mind department. That is to say, other species assume them to be harmless idiots. Both of these assumptions, however, are not wholly accurate. They are not exactly as dumb as they appear, and they are quite capable of being harmful. In main canon, there are only 2 appearances of them as a central plot point of an episode, but they do make repeated background cameos as well as numerous references. In Apocrypha, we have a little more to add to them, but there is still not a grand amount to go on. Their homeworld is named Pakled, which usually irritates me when a species is named the same as their planet. After all, we're not humans from Humus, so why are Vulcans from Vulcan? But in the case of the Pakled, I can imagine the conversation went something like this. Pakled. Is that the name of your people, your culture, or your planet? Yes. The planet is described as an M-class world and mostly mountainous terrain from a very geologically active crust. Despite this tectonic activity, however, there are seldom full-on volcanic eruptions, and the craggy expanses of stone ranges give way to verdant and lush valleys between. It has seen few visitations, if any, from Starfleet or the Federation, as it lies beyond the explored edge of the Alpha Quadrant for the UFP. The species themselves are frequently described as rotund and harmless looking, with passive expressions that border between benign and permanently dazed. Their blood is reddish purple and their facial features are easily identifiable. They have long eyebrows that grow upwards, and most have a high hairline with ridges under the eyes and cheeks that curl down, giving them an unfortunate droopy expression. Their reputation for being dumb comes from several factors, and while it is true that they are rather slow-witted, if they were as lacking in intellect as they first appeared, then interstellar travel would be beyond them altogether. They do have rather limited communication skills, which leads them to heavily minimise their vocabulary, and they are quite gullible and can be slow to pick up on things. Yet they are a spacefaring species despite their shortcomings, because they possess a practical cunning and a wiliness, as well as a willingness to play up their reputation for their own gain. They are primarily scavengers, and likely obtained their first space vessels through commandeering others. They spend much of their time exploring in a nomadic fashion on their vessels, searching for further salvage, and when finding none, engage in deception and ambushes to obtain more. Their native technological level is rather poor, but they are apt at salvage and combine technologies from their collected spoils to improve their systems, sort of like slow Borg. Gear they obtain is roughly incorporated into their own systems, showing a decent level of engineering know-how, but because the majority of their technology was not developed by them, it often breaks down. But they do learn, it's just that rather than innovate new designs based off reverse engineering, they'd rather simply find a shinier object to replace a failing system, leading to the constant search for more things to make them go. They generally pilot Mondor-class starships, a presumed name, which itself is a rather rudimentary transport ship with minimal armaments and no faster-than-light capability. Yet they do have warp drive installed, so from who knows where, and no 2 vessels are alike because of their accrued salvage, adding to this eclectic mix of technology. By later encounters, the Pakled had continued to accumulate different technologies, crudely grafting ship components to their vessels to the point where, in 2380, 3 ships were encountered, complete with salvage or mining stations attached on their underside to scrap on the go, which I have a theory on that and I'll get to that later. This reluctance to innovate and develop for themselves is driven by a desire for instant gratification and the need to accumulate powerful, better gear so that they can stand above other powers. While it is easy to look at this species and underestimate them, doing so plays into their hands because of their duplicity. A common tactic is to present themselves as weaker and dumber than they appear, before attacking with previously hidden gear such as Romulan shields, Klingon disruptors and anything else they salvaged from prior hulks or victims. They rely on the element of surprise first and foremost, and this would not be that big of an issue if it wasn't for the fact that the Pakled continue to hold this reputation for being incredibly stupid. I mean, they still kind of are, but they're still cunning, and this vexing level of intelligence continually lures others into underestimating them, even 14 years after their initial first contact. Speaking of, they were first encountered in 2365 while pulling one of their fake distress call ambushes in order to kidnap Geordi LaForge in order to force him to create weapons tech for them and leverage access to the Enterprise's computer. They played up on their lack of understanding, lulled the ship into thinking they were harmless idiots, then played their hand. In 2380, the Pakled had become a much larger threat as they continued their gathering, creating much more dangerous amalgamations of craft. This could be accounted for because of two factors. Firstly, as speculated on in the episode, it's because Starfleet continued to underestimate them after its initial first contact and did not keep tabs on them. Secondly, there would have been ample salvage for them to help themselves too, without the need for their ploys. Between 2365 and 2380, there had been the emergence of the Borg, the ramping up of Starfleet technology, and several wars. The most notable being the massive Dominion War and therefore expansive debris fields across many systems involving the wrecks of Klingons, Dominion, Federation, Romulan and almost every other species in the two quadrants. It's no surprise then that the Pakled salvages and their vessels of 2380 were much larger and incorporated much more powerful technology. Evidence that even in this time they still do not fully understand their tech can be seen twice in no small parts. Firstly, when they arrive from warp, they bring with them the debris field of a prior salvage, suggesting a warp bubble that encapsulated and did not filter out the detritus around the warping ship, an obvious navigational hazard, and their slow rate of transport when they boarded the Cerritos, which is a sign of a struggling transporter system. It's also worth mentioning that not every Pakled has the same duplicitous streak to them, as many were seen frequenting Deep Space Nine, and we have references that they often were employed as cargo haulers and merchants. After all, if their goal is simply to acquire newer and better gear as they go, then trade and working for money with species like the Ferengi are more legitimate ways to go about this, that also earn fewer reprisals. In 2409, there were even some within the ranks of Starfleet according to Star Trek Online. The fact that they can find a place for themselves within Starfleet just goes to show that they are capable of applying themselves and learning and retaining information. Their names tend to be rather long, but of simple guttural syllables, such as Grebnedlog, Jacobog, Reginald, Bergneldon, Hopmikbud, Melangog, and Durf. In real life, many of these names are just human names backwards, so it's a little hard to draw a simple rule for Pakled names because they are just derived from a myriad of human names. So, all in all, the Pakled are a species of salvagers that will go to any length to acquire newer, better technology fueled by a cutting corners mentality. Ultimately, this is their biggest weakness, as they don't fully understand the specifics of the gear they have accumulated, just enough to cobble it together and get it moving. So, as things inevitably fail on them, they lack the know-how to maintain or repair, so continue on with their nomadic accumulation of useful scrap. Pretty much a perfect example of why Starfleet has a prime directive and doesn't just give out its technology. Thanks for watching this video on the Pakled. Honestly, they're an easy species to poke fun at, but in reality I don't see how a culture like this could actually exist without its occasional savants, and there's this constant paradox where we're expected to believe that they are dim enough to be easily tricked, but smart enough to hodgepodge technologies together, so they must have a basic understanding of certain things like warp theory, or they'd all have blown themselves up. Closest I can assume is that they are just slow to learn and adapt, but do learn over a long period of time. I don't know, they're just difficult to quantify, and no culture nor species in Trek is truly uniform, it's just easier for narrative's sake. You can cast your vote for the next index over on the Community tab or suggest one to look at in the comments section below, but the two options to choose from next are taken from the runners-up of previous indexes, either the Tusken Raiders of Star Wars, because there were a lot of people saying that they would still like to see them, or second place from the last index, the Artificial Geth of Mass Effect. Thanks for watching. I've been Rick and I'll see you again next time for another index video. Goodbye.